All right, here we go. Lovely. All right. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, drop in the chat. I'm keeping an eye on everything. With that, let's get going. Today we're gonna talk about more CSS. So we're gonna learn about a few CSS things that you may not have covered in the CSS lectures, and then we're gonna talk about Bootstrap, which is a wrapper class over CSS and JavaScript that gives us access to tools that we may have to develop ourselves. If you didn't quite catch that, that's 100% all right. We're gonna elaborate much more on that later. And finally, we're gonna do some setup here together, and I'm gonna help you debug it for if any bugs arise to prepare for the remainder of the front end track. So let's get into it. Media queries. What are media queries? There are a CSS way to display different websites differently on different technologies. What do I mean by this? Well, let's quickly do an example. Here we have our project one website pulled up. Feel free to pull it up right now as well. This is the one we'll be using and editing and learning on today. But in the meanwhile, let me pull up the Web at Berkeley website. And it is going to give us a great example about how this idea of different technologies, different things showing up at different sizes of screens comes into play. So you look at this right here. This is known as a hamburger display. It's a drop down with your navigation bar. And if you notice, if I make this big enough, which unfortunately seems like it's going to have to be a full page thing, it changes. There is no more hamburger here. It's all spread out. And if I go into inspect tools, developer tools, there we go. It's hamburgered again. Full, and then as we start decreasing the screen size, boom, boom, boom. There we go. See the flip? There we go. So how do we display different things on different screen widths and sizes? That's the idea of media queries. And how do these work? Well, let's go through it. We use something known as the Atmedia Rule to include or uninclude blocks of CSS if a certain condition is true. So you can think of these as if cases. So if the screen is mobile size, do something else do something else. A quick example of the following is something like this. Let's kind of decode this word by word real quickly. So if the media that we are at currently is a screen and only a screen, no other media works. There are other forms of media as well. People can listen to websites, remember. And the maximum width of that screen needs to be 600 pixels, which means that the screen's width is less than 600 pixels. Then take the body and give it the background color of light blue. I hope that made a little bit of sense. But if you're still like uncomfortable with this, completely all right. We're going to do a lot of examples. So any preliminary questions about media queries? Awesome. Then let's get right into the demo. I'd request all of you to go ahead and pull up your project ones, simply because it's everyone already has the setup in some part, and it's quite easy to use, you know. All right, so this is a project one that I have completed, filled out. It's right here for you to also take a look at. The tags may be a little bit different for you and they are for me, but the basic idea remains. So let's just work on that. And here, one of the basic ideas is that every single one of these blocks is tagged with a class called story. So this block's a story, this is a story, this is a story. And all of these are also stories. So let's use that idea and see if we can do something with it. So we go to our CSS. This may be style.css for you. And we say at media, only screen, and max width. Nope. That's incorrect. Max width is 600 pixels. Right? And again, what does this mean? This means that the screen that we are talking about inside of these parentheses is smaller than 600 pixels. What do we want to do? Well, we want to take our story and you want to give it, let's say, the background color of light blue. And we save it and we reload it and nothing happens. Uh-oh. Or maybe not. Uh-oh. Because right now our screen width is probably not less than 600 pixels. So let's try to make it less than 600 pixels. Oh, look at that. Oh, okay. Strange excitement about changing colors aside, this is how media queries work. You can imagine somewhere around here being the 600 pixels line. And the moment I make it shorter than that, the color flips. So why do we need media queries? Well, let's see what happens when I squeeze down the screen more and more and more. And remember, things can be on very, very small screens as well. You see the CSS getting clipped out. And if I make it much smaller, even smaller, it's straight up disgusting like this. And it's completely unreadable. And yeah, no, you probably wouldn't want to visit this website, right? So how do we make websites not completely horrifying, so to say, on phones? And if you want to ever see what your thing on phones looks like, there's like a toggle device toolbar right there. If you click on it, right now the display is set to, I believe, an iPhone 10. So yeah, there we go. This is, well, an iPhone 10. This is what your website looks like in iPhone 10 form. Yeah, no, I would probably not want to be here. So let's try to fix that. But also, let's go through it as well. As for your question, Hector, the screen is us telling HTML that this command is only applicable when the thing that the person is using to navigate the website is the screen form. If someone's listening to the website, it doesn't quite matter how things change depending on size. Yeah, was there a question? Yeah, Jessica, great question. So most people will see your website through screens, but a lot of people are going to listen to your website for whatever reason. And in that case, you probably don't want to orient things according to size. As for what other options there can be, unfortunately, I've never used any other option explicitly so I will have to get back to you on that. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you for your questions, folks. Let's move further ahead into this. What's going on? All right. Another way to make a media query is to say, to ask if the orientation is landscape, and then decide on the body color or something like that. Why is this useful? Well, if you shift everything sideways, the relative dimensions of things change, and you probably want to adjust for that. So on a phone or on an iPad, it depends which way you're looking at the website. What's next? Right. And this is a particularly well used example of things. So remember that hamburger thing we saw in the Web at Berkeley website? That is this display none property is what that website is using. It's hiding the display of the full nav bar and adding the display of the small nav bar, the hamburger nav bar. So how can we use this in our lovely website right here? Well, let's say that we want to, let's say, okay, so a rows is 3 of these things, or rather just the row of these things. So this is a row and this is a row. What do we want to do with the rows? We want to, we want to take the display and change it to none. I wonder what will happen. Oh, right now the display seems okay. Let's cross the 600 px mark, and then our website just disappears. Oh, I always find this hilarious. So we basically made all the rows not displayable, and that took everything away. So TLDR, you probably don't want to do this with everything. You may want to do this with some things. For example, a common thing to do is not display a few images when the screen size is too small, because an image can probably only collapse to a certain point before it starts clipping the borders of its surroundings. All right, what are your questions about any of that? Awesome. Then let's go ahead and fix the project. Right now, the project's great. It's a lovely looking thing. But when you turn to mobile phone, it looks weird and unreadable. So how do we make this readable? Well, we once the screen size is small enough, we probably don't want the flex boxes, these rows, to be in a horizontal line. We want everything to be in a one vertical spread. So let's try to figure out a way to do that. Anyone with an idea about how to do that? You all have some experience with Flexbox now, so toss me your ideas.
Maybe flex wrap, so that, like, when you shrink it, the things will move to the next row if they're like cut off.
Yeah, I love it. Let's do that. Let's quickly reload it as well to confirm. Well, we'll probably have to make it smaller to make any real meaningful change. Let's do that. Oh, that did not quite work. Oops. And that's because the flex boxes, each of the boxes that we have no like width at which they would stop collapsing. So we would probably need to go like up here and assign them some max width, after which they don't collapse. So that's when they start wrapping. All right, any questions about that? All right. So how do we fix this? Any other ideas? Give me your craziest ideas. All right, I'll toss one. So there's something known as flex direction. And what that does is that it decides which way things are being flexed. They could be flexed horizontally or they could be flexed vertically. So my big idea is to say that we should set the flex direction to vertical. Ooh, that's interesting. Let's see what that does. Okay, reloading. And nothing. That was anticlimactic. Let's look at it in an even smaller size. Nope, nothing. RIP, folks. What went wrong?
But why did flex direction change the size of the font, or did it not?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What flex direction did is that it gave us a way to arrange things vertically, but we still haven't explained to this entire setup that you can't squeeze things into this much space. You still, and what we need to tell each of these sections right here is that it needs to take 100% of the screen. And we know exactly how to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the quarters, which is the name for these ones. We're going to take the half, which is the name of this one. And we're going to take the class of 3/4, which is this one right here. And we're going to tell all of them that their width is 100%. Then we're going to hit reload. Roop, roop. See, now that should have changed. Okay. That's okay. Let's figure this out. There we go. Oh, sorry. That was a loading issue. My bad. So that wasn't, man, they completely ruined my dramatism. So here, let's make the screen slightly bigger. That's greater than 600 pixels, so it looks like our normal website. Now let's collapse, 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 collapse. Boom. Notice how everything gets in a vertical order, following each other like so. And of course, it's blue as we described right here. Woo! Cause for celebration. All right. What are your questions about any of that? I know that didn't quite go as planned. So if you have a question, please go ahead and ask. Ooh, you're right. Should be column. I'm dumb.
For width 100%, how come each cell didn't just take up the entire width of the screen? Like, how did it know to just stop where it's supposed to be?
Okay, so there's a couple things that work in tandem here to help us out. The first one is flex direction column, which order things one after the other. The second is a width 100%, and it did take 100% of the width of the screen with its own padding, of course. So the width 100% is inclusive of padding and margin, which is why there's a little bit of this white space on either side. And finally, the flex wrap helped us not just have like a vertical scrolling web or like a horizontal scrolling website where everything is just like off screen. What flex wrap did was whenever we hit the end of our screen, it forced the other thing to go on the bottom.
I see. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions, folks? Actually, since we've done flex direction column, if my intuition is correct, we don't need the flex wrap. Okay, there we go. And collapse. There we go. Yeah, we wouldn't need the flex wrap because everything is arranged horizontally. Or wow, vertically. Okay. Any last questions about that? All right, if that's still a little bit unintuitive, 100% okay, you're gonna get a lot of experience. Oh, so great question, Yaren. What I do is I do command / and on most editors, that comments and uncomments things for you. Nifty little trick to know about. All right, here's some popular media queries, and not something you really need to understand, just good to know. You want to think about really, really small devices, then small devices, then slightly medium sized, large devices, and gigantic devices. And usually you won't have to handle for all of them. Some of them will be handled themselves, but you will probably have to handle for some of them. All right, let's quickly talk about some design philosophies. Remember when I mentioned before that we were going to talk about philosophies here? This is one of those instances. one of the biggest design philosophies when it comes to media queries is something known as mobile first. What does that mean? It's pretty kind of self-explanatory. You want to design with the mobile in mind and then adapt it to the laptop. There's a few reasons for this. The biggest one probably is that the mobile is incredibly popular nowadays. Most people will view your website on the mobile, and that's just trends speaking. I'm not generalizing, that's just what trends are and statistics say. So you probably want to design with the mobile as the priority. And the other reason is that the smaller the screen, the more you have to boil your website down to the barest essentials. So if you have a complete gigantic screen to play with, you're going to put more things on the screen because you have more space. But when you only have the space of your single screen, you're going to be forced to think about how you're going to place things on the screen and what you're going to keep and what you're going to cut out. And that's usually pretty helpful. All right. Any questions about any of that? All right. With that, let's get into animation. So this is probably the coolest part of CSS because you finally get to move things on the screen. So if you ever have seen like a 1999 website where like the name of the person was going like screen right to screen left or something like that, you'll learn how to do that now. So animations are made using something called keyframes. If you have ever used some technology like Adobe Animate or Adobe Flash or something like that, you'll be a little bit familiar with this. The idea of keyframes is to describe how things are going to change frame to frame. Here, the idea of frames is not as explicit. Here, the idea of frames is just that you set a duration and you set some goals inside of that duration. And the keyframes keyword helps you move from one to the other. So here's a quick example, probably one of the easiest examples. This is an example of a fade out. So at time 0%, this is always a little bit confusing. Well, here 0% means time 0%, the opacity is 1, and at time 100%, the opacity is 0. So it goes from 1 to 0, except that it doesn't just go 1 0. What keyframes does is that it starts from 1 and pulls it down to 0 for you. Here's another way of writing the same thing, and probably a little bit more intuitive. It's using the from and the to keyword. So you start from opacity 1 and you go to opacity 0. So now that we know how to write keyframes, let's also talk about how to include it in the CSS that we've already written. And that's this horrifying block of text. So let's quickly learn whatever this means, right? Animation name is just the name of your keyframe function. Function, let's say, right here, fade and fade. Animation duration is the length of time that keyframe is going to happen. Notice how keyframes functions themselves do not specify time. This is where you specify the time. Animation delay is basically us telling the element to wait for this time period before you start running the animation again or for the first time. What does this mean? We'll see a couple examples. Animation duration count is how many times you want to run that animation. Animation timing function is very interesting. It's how you want your animation to be run. So it can be linear, which means that it's the same speed from start to end. It can be ease out, which means it starts linear and goes linear, and at the end, it kind of slows down, it eases out of it. It can be ease in, which means that it starts slow and then gets to a linear speed. It can be ease in out, which means that it starts slow, gets to a speed, ends slow, and you don't need to remember all of this. I'm just telling you all of this for some intuition about what's going on here. And animation direction is telling you whether you want to go front to end to front, or something like that. Usually it's set like in the forwards direction. So you go from 0 or from to 2, but you can also send things from to from. Very interesting. All right. I'll make one more note about animation and then we can answer some questions. So there's a few settings for animation timing function, which is this one right here. These settings are linear, ease in, ease out, ease in out, Ease is just everything's a little bit slower than you'd expect. It's smoother. And Cubic by Bezier is one that I've never used. I also heard about it today, so we'll also maybe try it out. Let's see. And a few settings for animation fill mode, which remember sets the direction of things. And oh, wait, sorry about that. There we go. And here's a few examples. It can be forwards, backwards, both, so it goes forwards then backwards, or none, which is just forwards default. Okay. Any questions about any of that? Man, I threw a lot of information on you guys. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Okay, awesome. In that case, we're going to dive right into a demo to help you guys kind of visualize things. So we have the heading, this heading right here, the News Times, right there under the class name brand. And what we want to do with this heading is make it fade in whenever the page is loaded. Let's try to do that. So we're going to add a new selector brand, which is for this heading right here. Your class name may be different. That's completely okay. And we want to give it some animation name. And we're going to specify all that. But before that, we got to write the animation. So let's do that first. Keyframes. We're going to call this fade in. It's going to be a simple animation. From opacity is 1. So at the beginning, the opacity of the thingy is 1. 2, opacity equals 0. It starts with 1, becomes 0. Simple enough, right? All right, awesome. And then let's just fill out everything else. We want to set some animation name. We want to set animation duration. Let's say 4 seconds. We're going to set animation delay to be not 1 second. Let's say 0.5 seconds, really small. We're going to set animation iteration count to be 4. I want this to happen 4 times. I want to set animation timing function to be linear. I want to set animation direction to be none. All right, awesome. Yeah. Let's go. Everyone, if you're following along, I'm going to give you a second to write that down on yourself as well. And drum roll, please. Oh, did you see that? Whoop. Uh-oh, what happened? Well, what happened is that I said from 1 to 0, which is fade out. There's a little stupid bug. Let's remove that. Let's flip it up. We want it to not be visible, opacity 0, and then become visible. Ooh. There we go. And then it fades in again, and it'll do this 4 times because our iteration count is 4. And this may not be the clearest thing right now, but there is like a 0.5 second gap between each of those visible loads as well. All right, what are your questions about any of that? Awesome.
Can you explain the timing function? Why did you put it as linear?
All right, so unfortunately, in this example, it may not be as clear, but let's change things out a little bit. Let's try ease in out instead. Great question, by the way. Thank you. I do not know if you guys can see a difference, but in ease in out, it starts a little bit slower, then maintains some speed, and then ends a little bit slower. And as you can probably ascertain, in ease in, it starts a little bit slower and then maintains the speed to the end. And then ease out is just the opposite. It starts at a certain speed and then slows down at the end. So ease in and out are used whenever you want something to have a certain pace about itself. Unfortunately, I don't think there's an intuitive idea or a non-intuitive way to describe which to use when. But if you know all of them, you can always swap them out and see which one's most intuitive for you and your website, wherever you're writing it. And mostly it's not that big a difference. So if you use linear versus in-out or something like that, it's perfectly fine. Hopefully that answered your question. That was a kind of a wishy-washy answer.
Thank you.
No problem. And your questions, folks?
What's the difference between animation direction none and forwards? Or are they just the
Oh,
same?
no. Great question. So animation direction none basically tells it to use the same direction. Animation direction forwards tells it to go forward. So here it's the exact same thing. There are some animations that will like jump around between different parts, or like it jumps from 0 to 25% to 50% to 100%, and then that specification becomes more important. In 99% of cases, it's not important. All right, any other questions, folks? Okay, one last note, you probably don't want to add like 5 categories to the same thing. So this is shorthand for animation. You say animation, and you give it all of your characteristics in a certain order. I have removed a few of them because they were a little bit pointless, just boil it down to its essentials. And there we go, should work the exact same way. All right, any questions? Excuse me. Awesome. So this is something I'm going to skip for now, just because of paucity of time. But do go ahead and try this yourself if you have the time, and add this as a function. What it's going to do is that it's going to make things circular, one edge at a time. Very cool. All right. Before we go on to Bootstrap, any questions about animations, media queries, anything like that? Awesome. All right. Then let's talk Bootstrap. The idea behind Bootstrap is that web developers are lazy. That's the long and short of it. So more concretely, you do not want to write things that are already very common and therefore everyone uses. So for example, a drop down is something that you'll see on most websites you visit. So you probably do not want to write a drop down of your own. The solution, an external library with a drop down definition, a CSS and a JavaScript, whose classes you can use in your HTML to invoke those CSS and JavaScript components. And that's what Bootstrap is. It's honestly that simple. It's just some CSS and some JavaScript that work on a select name of classes. And as long as you can include those HTML, those CSS and JavaScript files, and use those classes where they're relevant, it will pick up the CSS and JS that you haven't written, but is in the Bootstrap library. What are your questions about any of that? Okay. So how does Bootstrap work? Well, first we have to import a bunch of things, which is essentially everything Bootstrap needs to work. This is just straight up off their website, getbootstrap.com. I'm going to place it in the chat as well, Oh, that's ugly. Huh. But if you want to walk along with this, just add this to your header and it will give you the power of Bootstrap. The interesting thing about Bootstrap is that most of Bootstrap is easily Googleable. And that's what I've done here as well. Let's start from here. Bootstrap has something called the Jumbotron, which you'll be able to see right there. I've called the division a Jumbotron and I've called it text center. So you can assume that it will probably make the text really, really big and then center it. And then I put some text inside of it. So I uncommented that. Bootstrap is also working now. So let's see how that looks. Oh, sad. One sec, folks. Oh no, I seem to have broken something. Ooh, when in doubt, Control Z it out. Okay, I did break something, but that's okay. We're gonna fix it. Let's add our scripts back in. That shouldn't, oh, there we go. Still working, lovely. And then let's go ahead and add our div here back in as well. There we go. Aha, there we go, folks. As you can see, it says this right here. And you may be asking, why should I use their libraries when I can do this myself? Well, because they've added a lot of CSS for you. It collapses on itself. It doesn't clip anything. It has its own borders. And if I go ahead and change it to something like a phone, you'll notice that it also has its own comfortable. Yep, Hector, that is it. That's why Bootstrap is so cool, because you can just import its CSS and JavaScript and do none of the work. And all of it's done for you. So as you can see, it's collapsed for you here, and that one may not be that impressive. So let's do another one that's not that impressive. I know you guys remember this, but y'all spend a lot of time learning flex boxes and how do we do all these flex boxes things. I've added what is essentially Bootstrap's version of columns. There you go. Ooh, there you go. Clean and horizontal, right? And look what happens when I start collapsing the screen. 3, 2, 1. There you go. And it all becomes vertical. So what we learned today about all of those things about media queries and how to handle different screen sizes, Bootstrap gives all that to you wrapped up in an abstracted idea of these class names. So all you need to know is these class names and use them properly. And it arranges things for you without you having to write the CSS and JavaScript. And these examples may seem a little bit trivial. So let's use something that is extremely not trivial that Bootstrap gives us, which I mentioned before, a dropdown. Look at that. As you can imagine, that would be a hassle to set up both in JavaScript and CSS. You would have to do an on click, you will have to do this hover on color, you have to do the drop down. A really cool thing about the drop down is that it drops up because it's at the bottom of the page right now. But if I take it to the top of the page, that's an unfortunate place, but notice it drops down. And all of that is inbuilt into Bootstrap. Isn't that cool? And I'll take it a step further. I'll explain why Bootstrap is even cooler than that. Let's bring it back real quick. There we go. Imagine I don't like this color right here, this color. I can go ahead, take the class button, BTN, go in my CSS, say button, background color, yellow. And once I reload that, whoops, wrong class. Sometimes you gotta figure out. Uh-oh. Let's try drop down toggle instead. Man, every time I try to show something cool, it just oh well, let's do something else. Sorry guys. Let's change something else. Okay, let's take drop down menu and give it an animation of the fade in. Just as we did before. And that should go ahead and fade things in. Aha. Oh, look at that. It fades in now. This is completely unnecessary. Preferably don't do this, but it is a thing that works. Okay, what are your questions about Bootstrap or just any of this in general? Well, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time to think about your questions. Till then, I'll talk a little bit about Bootstrap in general. So, why am I not introducing Bootstrap more thoroughly? It's because you do not need to know how Bootstrap works to use Bootstrap. In fact, that's its power. All you need to know is how to write down the specification about the drop-down menu, which is right here. And the way to write this down is just to pull this by from the internet and change the details that need changing. There are many types of Bootstrap for many different technologies. The most common one is just the pure HTML, CSS, JavaScript Bootstrap, and that's at getbootstrap.com. I'll add that in the chat. Getbootstrap.com. And on the getting started page, you can see all of those CDNs. One quick note before I jump into the philosophy of all this. You probably shouldn't do this kind of linking. Why? Because these kind of links, they take time to load. They're HTTPS links. So your website needs to get this script from this link and then put it in your website proper and then get it running. And what this can lead to is FOUT, which stands for Flash of Unstyled Text. It's when you're loading a page and suddenly you see like the website not with no CSS and the text is all like Times New Roman and it looks horrible, and then it triggers and everything's beautifully coded. Especially on slow internets, this happens very often if you are not housing your CSS and JavaScript locally. So the correct way to use Bootstrap, in my opinion, is to download the Bootstrap CSS and JavaScript compiled files and put it in a folder and then refer to that folder and upload that folder in your project. All right. Bootstrap philosophy. So at this point, I hope you agree with me. Bootstrap's pretty cool. So why do we not go ahead and just use Bootstrap for everything? Well, the fact that Bootstrap is so widely accessible and widely used means that it obeys a lot of the trends of our time. It makes dropdowns very simple, very uniform. And the keyword there is the uniform. So the problem with Bootstrap is that every website that uses Bootstrap starts looking the exact same. And the problem with that is that every single website you go to will have this kind of dropdown. It will have this kind of header. And it reduces the amount of creativity that you can put in. And while you can, yes, do CSS and JavaScript on these classes yourself and override bootstraps, There's still a little bit of limitation. As you noticed, I couldn't change the button or the drop-down toggle, even though I tried. And those are things you will run into while you do Bootstrap, because there are some things that they mark as unchangeable just for their internal tech to work. So why to use Bootstrap? It's accessible. It makes things faster. It allows you to not develop things that you could just get from elsewhere. Why not use Bootstrap? Because you don't want everything you develop to look like every other website on the internet. You want your work to look unique, and you want creative control over what you use, which Bootstrap does take away at least a little bit. All right, what are your questions about any of that? All right. I'm gonna give you guys a couple of minutes to recharge. We've been doing this for like an hour. I also need to go get a glass of water, and then we'll jump into setup for the remaining front-end lectures. Feel free to use this time to think about questions, to kind of test things out for yourself. I'll be right back. Oh. All right. Anyone who's still here, vibe check. How are we feeling about this?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Are we allowed to like edit anything that Bootstrap has defaulted for us? Like, could we add on top of it? Like, for example, like change the color? Okay.
Yeah, you could. I'm pretty sure drop down toggle is not unchangeable. I'm just having the unfortunate experience of not changing it correctly. So my big assumption right now is that they aren't using background color to set this color. They're using something else, and I don't know what. So the correct way to fix this color would probably be to go in the Bootstrap library, look at what the color is, and then change it accordingly. It's probably like some color setter that they're using.
Okay,
So you can change 99% of things, and what you can't change, you can always pull Bootstrap locally and edit Bootstrap itself.
Okay, thank you.
I feel that. No, yeah. The good thing about today is that this is pretty extraneous. You can probably Google most of the things once you know they exist. So if you're like not getting a good grasp on it, it's fine. It's all Googleable. We're fine, folks. All right. Okay. So as promised, today's lecture is going to be smaller. Woo! Unfortunately, now you guys have to do things, because the next thing that we're gonna do today, go away. The next thing we're gonna do today is setting up for the remaining classes. What are we gonna set up? We're gonna set up the set of tools that are gonna help us make the next few classes smoother. So I'm gonna have to ask all of you to go to the Notion under front end, under the first lecture. You'll see something known as installation and basics. I'm gonna give you all a second to do that, and give me a vibe check once you're done with it. fact, let me quickly stop sharing my screen, and I'm also going to pull up my Notion so you guys can see exactly what I mean. Notion front end, I believe, lectures or just the first tab on the front end. And at that point, you'll see today's lecture, which is more CSS, lesson plans, and week 1, more CSS, Bootstrap, and setup. And inside of that, you will notice front end installations and basics. Everyone, Wyben, found it, completely lost. What's going on? Awesome. All right. If you haven't found it, let me know. Drop me a message, drop me a private message, or it's fine, and then we can get to it as well. So then let me quickly share my screen. Aha. All right. So what is all this? Well, all these are tools that we're going to use to make development faster and smoother. So let's talk about them one by one. And every time we talk about something, I want you guys to go on the link and hit download and get this downloaded in whatever way is most convenient to you. And if it isn't downloading for you, let me know and I'll find some other substitute link for you. So what is Node? Node is basically something that stabilizes JavaScript. What does this mean? Well, you'll notice that the only language here between HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is JavaScript. I've mentioned this in passing before, but HTML and CSS are not languages. HTML is markup, and CSS is a style sheet. So what we can do is that we can take HTML and CSS and put it inside of JavaScript. Why would we do this? Well, one language is much easier to manage than 3 languages. And what Node does is that it allows us to write things in JavaScript without worrying about HTML and CSS. And this idea will come into play later on as well. Node is bigger than that, and you can read a little bit about here. But that's the basic principle that we will have to worry about. When will we use Node? We'll use Node to hold on to every single framework we'll use in the remaining class. And those frameworks include things like React, which is coming up next week. And the way that those frameworks allow us to work is that we use these Node and NPM and all of these things. All right. Yes, you want to download LTS. LTS, for those who don't know, like I didn't know, like 3 days ago, is long-term support. You probably always want to use long-term supported tech. All right, okay. Go ahead and everyone go ahead and download this. Till then, I'll talk about the server. What is a server? Well, lovely. You see this website right here? This is being served to us by some means. More importantly, something like slides.google.com or docs.google.com is also being served to us by some place that holds the website. So the server is the thing that holds the website, holds your data, and when a computer kind of makes the query, what it does is that it gives you the website over, and then that local person can take the website for a while and run the website. Why do we care about servers? We mostly don't. If you don't know what a server is, you can still write front-end tech, but it's good to know how things work. If you got the download down, awesome. You don't need to do anything else. And once it's downloaded, click on it, install it, get it set up on your computer, all those lovely things. You probably don't need to move it to anywhere. Once you like hit the package or whatever is getting downloaded, and it'll run to an installation and all those lovely things. You may have to look for it a little bit. NPM. So NPM is using the idea of node and making a manager for node. It's the node package manager. The idea behind NPM is that when you write big things, they come with a lot of dependencies. You already started noting this idea of dependencies. Remember how we had to put links for Bootstrap inside of our HTML file? Imagine doing that for hundreds of things inside of one HTML file. Very messy. So how do we manage all of these things? We use NPM. NPM takes the instance of that dependency and adds it to our file and maintains it in something known as node modules. More on this next class. What is NPX? NPX is new NPM. NPX is another manager. It's a tool to help you find these dependencies that you're looking for more easily. We'll also be learning more about this later. What's the difference between NPM and NPX? NPM is the manager that manages things locally. NPX is more a thing to look for packages instead of managing them. All right, go ahead and install NPM. Woo! All right, if anyone's having installation problems, let me know. If it downloads with Node, then you do not need to worry about it. If you go ahead in your terminal and type npm and it works, it doesn't give you like a message does not exist. You probably do not need to move Node into VS Code. It should exist inside of VS Code, naturally speaking. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my terminal. If you pull up your terminal and you type these things in and you get these reactions, you're good to go. So if I type in Node, I get something like welcome to Node, blah, 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 and it gives me a tiny little prompt. Very nice. If I go ahead and type in npm, it gives me a giant npm blurb. Yes, npm LTS. If these two commands work for you, then you do not need to download anything else. Awesome. I'm going to quickly make a couple notes about Emmet. What is Emmet? Emmet is actually an AI tool that will suggest line completions for you. So in web development, there's a lot of things you have to write quite repeatedly, and it gets annoying. So Emmet goes in and gives you suggestions about auto-filling up your code. It's basically like an autocomplete, but more accurate, and it's very helpful to use. So this is not necessary by any stretch of the imagination, but highly recommended. And go ahead and download that as well off of your Notion page. I'm sorry, I completely blanked out. Okay, and with that, we will have downloaded everything. If you go to your terminal, you just go to your terminal and you type in npm and you hit enter, and you get a big blurb about the things you can run with npm or what npm is and all this. Your npm is good and ready to go. Yeah, Emmet is amazing. 110, always recommend. All right. And once you're done with that setup, we are done for today. Oh my God, imagine being done on time. This is nice, folks. You can download an Emmet if you want. I highly recommend it, but it is not necessary. So you are your own person. Download it if you want. All right. So before I give you all full freedom to go away, any last questions? Any questions about the front end track or any thoughts about how you want things to go and stuff like that? All right, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.